for this precious time in your word. We thank you so much for the gospel messages, the gospel books that we can use in our everyday life. And we ask that each one here would see these words as precious to us, and that we'd apply them and live godly as we ought to unto you. We thank you in your Son's name. Amen. Okay, if you would open your Bibles to Mark. Even though we're studying the book of Matthew, I want to turn you to Mark because Mark has a more accurate documentation of the event that we see Christ healing the woman with an issue of blood. Now, out of the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, these are the four books. Of course, I went and back in November, I introduced the New Testament to you and explained that the apostles wrote just a few of the books of the New Testament. It mainly were disciples that were the authors. And it's no different in the four Gospels. Out of the four people that wrote the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, only two were apostles, Matthew and John. Mark and Luke were, of course, disciples or students of Christ, and they were right there with Christ, learning from him day in and day out also, but they were not apostles. And in this case, with the first event that we're studying this morning, the woman with an issue of blood, Mark had a super simple, abbreviated form of what he saw. It's really short. The Dr. Luke missed details. And Mark nailed it. He had most detail nailed down and the best description of what really happened. And so I think that's the place I'd like to show you. The woman with an issue of blood, how Jesus said, "Daughter, be of good comfort, thy faith hath made thee whole." And the point that I want to teach this morning is it's the faith that Christ gave this woman is why Christ healed her, not her personal commitment to God or belief in God. It's the faith of Christ. And this comes up twice here in these miracles Christ performed. The first one's with the woman with the issue of blood. So let's look at Mark chapter 5. Verses 24 through 34. Jesus went with him, and much people followed him and thronged him. And a certain woman which had an issue of blood 12 years had suffered many things of many physicians. This is the detail that Mark didn't capture, or Matthew didn't capture, Mark did, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse. That was the detail that Luke didn't get, that she grew worse with the physicians. And this is an important fact, that this woman did everything humanly possible to better her state. And it's important to see that this is a picture of a person that's just needs salvation. And everything that you do of your own power and strength only makes it worse, only proclaims a worser state. And that's where Mark captured the events most accurately between the three that captured this event. And it's important to see that. But when she had heard of Jesus, came in the press behind and touched his garment. For she said, "If I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole." And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up. She felt in her body that she was healed of that plague. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned him about in the press and said, "Who touched my clothes?" Disciples said unto him, "Thou seest the multitude thronging thee, and sayest thou, Who touched thee? Touched me?" And he looked round about to see her that had done this thing. Of course, Jesus knowing all things. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what was done in her, came and fell down before him and told him all the truth. And this is another good detail that's captured here in Mark, that the honesty that the sinner has in coming to Christ is that they explain everything. They completely are honest and open about their state. Jesus said, "Daughter, thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace and be whole of thy plague." So this miracle Christ performed And it was declared that it was the faith that Jesus had given her. Now, the false Christian churches will read this and say, see, you have to strum up your own faith in order to be healed by God or saved by God. And that's not what's being said here. It's quite the contrary. She was given the faith, and I'll show it here later in the blind men when Jesus says, according to your faith be it unto you. And I'm going to show you that it's Jesus' faith within these blind men that are also healed in Matthew. But first with this woman, why was the woman so pressed towards touching Christ and knowing that that's when she'd be healed, being convinced in herself? And I want to take you to Exodus 28 to show you why she was so convinced. Exodus 28 is about the high priest's garment. And this is where this woman's faith that God gave her resided. It wasn't on her own ability at all. In fact, she just got worse and worse when she tried to heal herself and have other people heal her that were physicians. And it's not saying bad things about physicians. If you need a doctor, go to a doctor, of course. Exodus 28 verse 30 is where Aaron, the second half is Aaron's the high priest, shall bear the judgment of the children of Israel upon his heart before the Lord continually. I'm convinced this woman knew that Jesus was and is the high priest. And she knew if she just touched the hem of that garment, that she'd be made whole, because her sickness would be transferred to him. As the high priest, as Aaron was in the Old Testament, the one that took the judgment of the children of Israel upon himself. This is a substitutionary work of Christ. This is the core of faith, to know that our ailments, our sin, our death is put onto the high priest, transferred to the high priest. And furthermore about the robe in Exodus 28, verse 31, and thou shalt make the robe of ephod all of blue, and there shall be a hole in the top of it, in the midst thereof, and it shall have a binding of woven work round about the whole of it, as it were the whole of a habergeon. That's a armor, the coat of armor. So coat of armors were made with little pieces of plating that was really hard to tear open or pierce through. And that's what this garment was on the high priest. It was to be made just like armor. And beneath upon the hem of it thou shalt make pomegranates of blue and of purple, scarlet round about the hem thereof, the bells of gold between them round about, a golden bell and a pomegranate, a golden bell and a pomegranate upon the hem of the robe around about. And it shall be upon Aaron to minister, and his sound shall be heard when he goeth in unto the holy place before the Lord, and when he cometh out, that he die not. So this woman's faith that Christ gave her was to see that that the high priest was on the earth, that Jesus is the high priest, and Jesus was the one that was going to go into the holy place and put his blood on the mercy seat for a particular people. And she wanted to be one of those people. She desired to be saved, to be healed, to be made whole. And that's the faith that Christ gave her, to see that if she just touched the hem of his garment, she'd be made whole. And she was given to touch that hem of the garment, and she was made whole by the power that Christ gave her, by the faith that Christ gave her. And we'll see that with the two blind men too. But moving down now, the daughter of Jairus is raised from the dead is the next point that we want to study. And this daughter of Jairus, again, Matthew kind of hit a couple points, and Luke hit a couple points, but Mark chapter 5, Mark really captured most the detail about the miracle Christ performed with Jairus' daughter. Matthew didn't even capture Jairus' name, where Mark did. So turn back to Mark chapter 5 with me, and let's read this miracle that Christ performed of healing. Mark chapter 5 verse 22, and behold, there cometh one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He worshipped Christ as God, and besought him greatly, saying, My little daughter lieth at the point of death. I pray thee, come and lay thy hands on her, that she may be healed, and she shall live. Look at the faith that God gave, that Christ gave Jairus. No question, no doubts. Faith at his feet, pleading that you just touch my daughter and she'll live. She'll be healed. He is acknowledging Christ as God incarnate. And then moving over to verse 35 is when, while he yet spake, there came from the ruler of the synagogue's house certain which said, Thy daughter's dead. Don't trouble the master any further. And as soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he said unto the ruler of the synagogue, Be not afraid, only believe. This is where it's assured to God's people that the belief that God provides for you, the faith that God provides, is what will raise your daughter from the dead. Not your faith. It's the faith that God... And he suffered no man to follow Jesus except for Peter, James, and John. Now this is the inner circle. If you go back on your notes, back on November 13th, I gave you the list of the apostles. James, John, Peter, Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, and so forth. James, John, and Peter are the primary apostles that Christ said, you come with me when I do this miracle. And that's what he did at this time. He put Peter, John, and James at his coattail and said, follow me into this. And they came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and seeth the tumult of them that wept and wailed greatly. And when he was come in, he saith unto them, Why make ye this ado and weep? And the damsel's not dead, but sleepeth. And they laughed him to scorn. But when he had put them all out, those are the people that mock Christ, he taketh the father and the mother of the damsel, and them that were with him, that's the Peter, John, and James. So it goes in with these 5 others, 3 apostles and the 2 parents with this girl. And he entered where the damsel was lying, and he took the damsel by the hand and said unto her, Talitha cumi, which has been interpreted, Damsel, I say unto thee, arise. And straightway the damsel arose and walked. And she was of age 12 years old. That's a detail that Mark captured here. And they were with astonishment. There was great astonishment. And he charged them straitly that no man should know it, and commanded that something be given to her to eat. So this miracle that Christ performed also is revealed to just who Jesus wants to reveal it to. His 3 apostles, the 3 of his 12, he brought in with him, and the parents. And so it would be recorded and adopted into the Word the way he wants it to be. And that's how we're reading it today, with the detail that he prescribes that we should receive it and understand it. That it's Jesus' power and it's Jesus touching her that raised her from the dead. And that's important to see. He is God incarnate, able to take life, able to give life. So it wasn't a mystery or miracle to Christ that she had died and he was going to raise her from the dead. It was predestined by the Father that he would do this miracle to convince particular people that this is God incarnate on the earth. This isn't just a priest or a prophet. This is God incarnate, God with us. And the next miracle that we see are the 2 blind men healed. Now we're going to go to Matthew, and this is only recorded in Matthew. The 3 other books missed, the 3 other writers missed this miracle completely. And it's just a couple of verses in Matthew, was it 27 of Matthew chapter 9? When Jesus departed thence, 2 blind men followed him, crying and saying, Thou Son of David, have mercy on us. And when he was come into the house, the blind men came to him, and Jesus saith unto them, Believe ye that I am able to do this? And they say, Yea, Lord. Then touched he their eyes, saying, According to your faith be it unto you. And their eyes were open, and Jesus straitly charged them, saying, See that no man know it. But they, when they were departed, spread abroad his fame in all the country. So Jesus performing this miracle, and this is the only place in the Scriptures where this is captured with these 2. But Christ reiterates the same thing he told the woman with the issue of blood, that your faith had made you whole. Now this is used to blind the reprobate. Reprobates believe that they have to strum up faith to believe in God. But the approbate, God's beloved, and the seed that God has destined us to come to saving awareness, we see this as the miracle of Christ in the person before they're even healed, that he gives us faith to believe and rest and trust in his power alone. So this, as Jesus said, according to your faith, be it unto you. So this is the believing that Christ is your faith, is all power, is what I'm teaching this morning. Christ and Him alone is your faith, and He is your power for all your problems in your life. Everything, salvation, and every tiny detail. He is your power. It's not of you and in you. You can't conjure up faith or power to overcome the things in this world, the things in your life. It's got to be given by Christ dwelling within you. It's got to be given by Christ and Christ alone. Turn to Exodus chapter 4. I got 3 passages to kind of enforce this. The faith that Christ tells these blind men that healed them. And they knew who made them blind. They knew that the one that they stood in front of, that they were pleading to heal them, was the one that made them blind. Just like when God told Moses in Exodus chapter 4, Moses was complaining to God that he's a stutterer, that he didn't think he was the right one to lead the children of Israel out of slavery because he didn't have very good public skills of teaching and preaching and declaring God's will. He didn't speak eloquently. And when Moses is complaining about that he didn't have an eloquent voice or mouth, God says in Exodus chapter 4, verse 11, God's reply, and the Lord said unto Moses, who hath made man's mouth? Or who maketh the dumb, that's people that can't speak, deaf, people that can't hear, or seeing, or the blind? Have not I the Lord? So God levels down to Moses, and Moses' weakness was a gift from God, mercy from God. Just like the woman with the issue of blood. It's mercy and a gift that she had that sickness, to see that she needed power not of her own, not of the physicians around her, but of God and God alone. She needed faith from God, not her own faith. And these 2 blind men, they needed faith that wasn't of theirs. It was God-given. Turn to Galatians chapter 2 next, please. We see this as the clear place in the New Testament where we see the origin of authentic faith. God's faith is in Galatians chapter 2, verse 16, knowing that a man's not justified by the works of the law, but by the faith of Jesus Christ. Even we have believed in Jesus Christ that we might be justified by the faith of Christ and not by the works of law. For by the works of law shall no flesh be justified. So we see trying to conjure up a lifestyle that's obedient to God or to do something to merit credit with God, keeping the law, isn't faith, isn't salvation, isn't healing, it isn't the means to overcome your problems in your life. The only means of overcoming your problems, the only means of salvation, the only means of healing in your life is the faith of Christ. Verse 16 of Galatians 2, the faith of Christ is it. And that's what Christ imparts or imputes and gives to His people. He gives His very faith to live and reside within us. Look at Colossians chapter 1, lastly, for the 3 passages I want to take you to see the faith is of God and not of man, but it resides within His people. Last time I taught that the parables of the new cloth and the new bottles both were to preserve those conditions of the garment and the wine. And I think that was Christ speaking to those that were on the earth with Him, His apostles. He gave them faith person to person, right to them. And then after He departed, He gave them faith through the Holy Spirit that He gave to them. And that's precisely what they needed at the point in time in their lives, and to preserve them. And I think it's an interpretation of that those parables. And now in Colossians chapter 1, for by Him were, verse 16, for by Him were all things created that were in heaven, that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers, all things were created by Christ and for Christ. And He is before all things, and by him all things consist. The point of faith that's so preeminent in the mind of a believer, that God gives you faith to believe, and it's not your faith that you conjured up, is that you see God as Christ. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are one. And the very power of Christ is to give you your weakness and your ailments, that you'd rest and trust and rely on his faith and power to heal you and preserve you and to keep you and to save you. It's so amazing to see his preeminence over all things, his omnipotence, power over all things. But these two blind men were healed by the faith that Christ gave them to believe that they said, the Son of David, have mercy on us. They were given that belief to cry that to Christ, and that's exactly what Christ gave them to believe, so that he'd heal them, and it'd be proclaimed throughout all the world that it's the faith of Christ that heals, not the faith of a human. Now the next one is the dumb demoniac healed. Turn back to Matthew chapter 9. We've got verses 32 through 34 is another miracle of Christ, just a few verses. As they went out, behold, they brought to him a dumb man, possessed with a devil. Dumb means a person that can't speak. Now, God told Moses, if there's somebody dumb that can't speak, God made them that way. So again, we see God's hand in this man's life, that he can't even speak, and he's possessed with a devil. And when the devil was cast out, Jesus cast the devil out of this man. The dumb spake, and the multitudes marveled, saying, it was never so seen in Israel. But then look at what the religious people do. The Pharisees say he casteth out the devils through the prince of devils. They actually accuse Christ of being a devil and the prince of the devils. And this is the point that needs to be made, is the religious hate Christ. The religious don't want Christ to be all-powerful over all things. They want themselves to have dominion and power over some things in their life, and they want there to be a fairy tale of there's some power of evil other than God that's out there lurking and looming. And God's omnipotent. He made the evil. He made the wicked for the day of evil. He's the only power over all things. And religious people hate God omnipotent. They hate him because they want some control. Something has to be accredited to them. And God shares his glory with no man. And they reject God. And so that's what these religious people do in Christ's time on this earth. John chapter 15 says why. Jesus says why in John 15. It says, if the world hate you, John 15:18, if the world hate you, ye know that it hated me before it hated you. So we see this miracle that Christ performs, throwing out this demon out of this dumb man and then giving the man the ability to speak, is where the religious people show their hatred for Christ, accusing him of being of a devil. And of course, he's holy, thrice holy God. And but this is where you see that they hate Christ. And if they hate Christ, they're going to hate you if you're of Christ. It says in verse 19 of John 15, if ye were of the world would love his own. But because you're not of the world, but I have chosen you out of the world, therefore the world hateth you. So when you're plucked out of this world and you have the faith of God within you, and you trust and rely that God's omnipotent and giving you all your weaknesses and all your sorrows, that you'd rest and rely and trust and wait on him, the world hates you for that. They despise you. They want you to be proud and arrogant like they are and do things that oppose God, outwardly or inwardly. There's a lot of different varieties of the wrong way, the wicked way, the evil ways of this world. And a lot of them appear to be righteous and good, but the root of it is to justify man's self in their own works, and that is hate for Christ. But God has chosen a particular people out of this world, and the world hates us because we're chosen of God. Look at Luke chapter 6 also. Luke chapter 6 and verse 26 is where Jesus teaches, "Woe unto you when all men shall speak well of you, for so did their fathers to the false prophets." So false prophets are popular people. They're liked. They know how to hobnob. They know how to make people feel good about themselves. They make sure people's eyes are off of God and onto a false god. And it's usually themselves. They want to worship themselves, and they want other people to worship themselves. They don't want men to worship God exclusively. They want to steal the credit from God, and because that's what defines a false prophet. But those are the ones that are so popular in this world. So don't admire popular people. Don't think that's something for you. Be separate from the world. Understand that those that have God's faith within us, although we do righteous, good deeds that God does through that Spirit that He gave us, we're going to be hated for those things. We're going to be hated for giving credit and honor to Christ for the righteous things that we do and the good things that we do. And that's what's so great about God residing within us. When we do good and right, we're hated for it and despised. And the last point is the greatness of the harvest. This is amazing. Look at Matthew chapter 9 once again for the last few verses of the study this morning of chapter 9 of Matthew. That Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and preaching the gospel of the kingdom and healing every sickness and every disease among the people. I am just hung up on that. This Jesus, the true Christ, heals everyone with disease. All the disease were healed. He didn't leave one disease one out. The healthy folk walked right by. Walked right by. The diseased, every one of them, He stopped and healed them. What? But when He saw the multitudes, He was moved with compassion on them, because they fainted and were scattered abroad as sheep, having no shepherd. Then said He unto the disciples, The harvest truly is plenteous, but the laborers are few. Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest, that He will send forth laborers into His harvest. This is where Jesus acknowledges that in His time on this earth, there were so many elect, the seed that were fallen in Adam's sin were right there. There's so many around, walking around Him, that He said this is a plenteous time, but there's not too many preachers preaching the gospel. So this shows Christ's compassion on a specific people. Not everybody. Not everybody. It shows Christ's compassion on those that were elect all around. Not every single person that was around wandering lost. He was there for the elect of the Father. And that's what He was truly concerned about and in love with. And that the seed of God the Father would be restored through the preaching message of Christ's righteousness. And it's revealed in the next chapter, chapter 10, verse 6, where we'll be studying next week, the Lord willing, where He sent His apostles not out to everybody. He said, verse 6, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. There's a particular people that Christ saw when He looked out and said, the fields are white to harvest. Look at all these elect. He knew every one of us by name. He knows everyone by name. And when there's a high resolution, a high density of elect out there, that's when Jesus says there's got to be more to preach. There's got to be more to preach so that they come to know Christ savingly. So it's so neat to see the miracles Christ performed, wrapping this teaching session up with the blood that couldn't be healed any other way. And that's a great lesson for all of us, that anything that's a problem in your life that plagues you deeply, it's not going to be healed through human counseling. It's not going to be healed through your own rationale of a way out. It's only going to grow worse as you seek out the world and your own methods to heal. However, the faith that Christ gives is to see Christ as the high priest, and His blood and righteousness as your security and comfort before the Father, and your solution to all your problems in your life. That you're healed of the plague. Just you don't need to live in sin. You don't need to live in sorrow anymore. You're free and you're righteous before the Father. And your day-to-day life is free of the tyranny of the tragedies of this world. You don't need to be depressed about things. Your eye on Christ, you're liberated from these things that are so dreadful if our eyes are on the things of the world around about us. So be mindful of Christ in your day-to-day walk, and see that He's got all the power and all the ability to raise the dead to life. Can you raise the dead to life? No. The faith that Christ gives can raise what's dead in your life to life again. His power, His faith, not yours. So I bless the Lord for the teaching time. We're out of time, so we'll come back at 11 for the preaching. Thanks for listening.